like that introduction. Guinea pig.
It's the most appropriate introduction I've had so far.
Put that on your author bio. So I met Tim about 5 years ago. I was assigned to write a profile of him, and this is before he'd done the 4-Hour Body, and he'd written the 4-Hour Workweek, and so my job was to hang out with him for a week and see whether he really worked 4 hours. I actually think he worked like 2 hours. It was kind of just upsetting to me. But I noticed that he was unbelievably had this granular knowledge about what was going on with his body. That kind of stunned me, and I talked to Kevin Kelly, and he mentioned that the first ever quantified self meeting they had was just in the living room of I think Gary's house or Kevin's house, and there 14 people showed up, and one of them, they're like, this guy Tim Ferriss showed up, and no one had heard of Tim at that point in time. He hadn't written, but he did this elaborate decomposition of what was going on with his body and all these stats. And they were like, who are you? So I'm interested. We've been talking a lot about how to collect data on people, how to monitor our health. You've been doing it for a very long time. What got you originally interested in tracking a lot of specifics about your health, your body?
The beginning was wrestling, so collegiate wrestling, and I had been born premature, so I have reduced lung capacity on my left side, which means a few things. The most important of which is I have a lot of trouble regulating body temperature. So I would experience the equivalent of heat stroke on a pretty frequent basis, which is not good for wrestling. And I realized that I could game the system a bit if I became very good at losing body weight before weigh-in and then rehydrating effectively. So I started looking at things like the ratio of my skin surface area to my body mass, since muscle is basically just heat generation tissue, and then started experimenting with using, let's say, potassium-sparing diuretics. So I started looking at how to lose water weight and how you could pull water selectively from, let's say, subcutaneous tissue to try to maintain performance. So I ended up becoming pretty good at it, and I would cut from, let's say, 175 to 152 in 12 to 18 hours, and then rehydrate, and then win a lot of matches. And this is done by everyone at the high levels of wrestling. So one of the big scandals of Tim Ferriss lore is this Chinese kickboxing championship where I cut from 193 to 165 and then rehydrated, and that is part of the game when you're in weight class-based sports at the highest level. So it started with that, and around the same time, age 16 or so, I began recording all of my weight training workouts. So I have, since age 16, pretty much every single workout I've ever performed.
How old are you right now?
I'm 35.
Okay, right. So is this just like some totally crazy paper handbook, or did it migrate?
Paper. Paper. Wow. It's paper. And developed my own diacritical marks and notations so that I can track from one session to the next. And controlled variables, mostly rest intervals and number of days between identical sessions. So in any case, it started with the drive to become an All-American wrestling, and then for the kickboxing and whatnot. And then it extended from there into mental performance and nootropics and smart drugs and all that kind of stuff.
Now, what have been some of the effects of gathering so much data about your life? What do you notice about what relationship you have to your own health, to noticing what's going on with yourself?
There are a few things. I think most fundamentally, the act of measuring in and of itself makes you more aware of your decisions. So even if you create a metric that has no practical application, let's just say, like every time you walk into a room, you count the number of chairs or something like that, it will make you more aware of your surroundings and your decisions. So fundamentally, it just makes you a more aware human being, which I think has many downstream ramifications. But getting really specific, for instance, about a year ago, I did a test with WellnessFX, which is a startup that does blood diagnostics. And they break down your lipid profile very, very granularly. And I looked at a few of the saturated fatty acids and saw that I was very low in something called myristic acid. And myristic acid can be found in sperm whale oil, which I was short on at the time. And it can also be found in coconut oil. And so there were two questions. One was, why was I deficient? The second was, how do I fix it? And I wanted to try to fix it first, so I started taking tablespoons of coconut oil in the morning, and I was able to completely eliminate my morning coffee. I mean, the difference was so stark and came so fast, it really surprised me, which takes a lot. Let's see. Other things would include using, let's say, the ZEO for looking at sleep and realizing that my degree of restfulness or feeling fully rested depended on not the total amount of sleep, but the percentage of my sleep that was REM sleep. So I started experimenting with both tweaking my diet just before bed, but also taking things like galantamine or huperzine A, both of which are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors that have become very popular on the lucid dreaming forums for helping to induce lucid dreaming, which of course correlates to REM sleep. So I was able to dramatically change my sleep habits and largely eliminate insomnia, which I've had my entire life, by using, for instance, a Philips Go light in the beginning of the day. Those would be a few.
Now, so you did this originally pencil and paper in a notebook. Has it gotten easier as time goes on because there's been more monitoring devices? Do you use any of those things, or what's the array of types of things you've tried?
Yeah.
You know, like what works, what doesn't in terms of strapping stuff to yourself? You know.
Yep. So many ways I could go with that.
Yeah, I think I might want to.
No, so yeah. I would say that I am someone who has the peculiar malfunction of perhaps lacking a self-preservation mechanism. So I'll try just about anything. I've become a little, I would like to think, wiser in my older years. But whether it's, I think the bottleneck is really at the I have data and the I have information being actionable, let's say.
Right.
That gap is very hard to close. So if I have a Dexcom 7 device, for instance, which is a continuous glucose monitor.
And that's embedded in your body, right?
It's an implant.
Yeah.
So it's not very pleasant to put in, but it's not also bad. There are two probes that are about yay long, and you put them under your skin and then push them into your side, and then you put it on like a nicotine patch, and it transmits to a separate device, and you can watch the actual graph of your interstitial glucose. I would say that, for instance, in that particular case, I had the graph, and then the question was, how do I get this data to my computer? Well, not Mac compatible, need to use a PC, and then I get a CSV file or something like that.
And you get a virus.
Which is challenging. Yeah. So I would actually take that and then put it to paper. And I have found other tools, whether they're very, very simple, like the Lyft app, which is for behavioral modification, or slightly more complex with the social component, like the Nike Fuel Band.
Sure.
That's one of the best interfaces I've seen, actually.
What makes it so good?
It's intuitive.
Huh.
It's intuitive, and it is easily graspable by people who are not self-identified quants.
Yeah.
Most people do not like math. End of story. And I mean, one of the reasons I went to Princeton, for God's sake, was to avoid the math requirement. It's one of the few places that didn't have a math requirement. And embarrassing but true, and here we are. But I think there are a couple of gaps in the technology that I expect will get fixed in the next 5 years.
This blood monitoring you did, what did you learn about your body from that? I mean, were there any surprises in what you observed about your eating and how it affected your blood sugar and things?
One of the pieces that was most fascinating to me was how long it took a meal to really create a peak in my glucose levels, and what that led me to change, for instance, which was very practical, and I was able to do this after a week or two, was instead of taking a post-workout shake, this is very common, like in the lore of bodybuilding, there are even studies that seem to, by correlation, to support consuming protein after you work out. Well, if the amino acids, if you're combining with, let's say, maltodextrin, are hitting you at a peak 60 minutes later, you should actually probably take it before your workout, depending on the type of workout you do. So I started taking my post-workout shake before my workout, and my gains just took off.
Because stuff was taking so long to get into your system. Then.
Right. So by taking it, by timing it properly, I was able to have a maximal anabolic effect during the window within which I had maximal insulin sensitivity, among other things, and GLUT4 receptors are at the surface of muscle cells. And so the timing, I think that technology, more than what to do, when to do, is where people can apply things perhaps now as opposed to waiting. it can help a lot with the timing question.
Now, there was a great anecdote in the middle of your book where you're talking about being out at a date, and you're getting along really well with this woman, and great chatter, and then you basically go, please don't let this weird you out, and you pull out your scale, food scale, and begin measuring your food, which, as you say, is sort of serial killer behavior, and things went downhill from there, and you never saw her again. So. You know, with that on the table, is there what are kind of the social inhibitions towards being a quantified self person, and do you think those are sort of surmountable, basically, or are we just going to be a nation of serial killers? You know, carefully measuring our
there are two things that I'm not sure were in the piece that made it even stranger. So not only did I pull a scale out of not my backpack, but I had this weird like man purse thing, which was like another red flag.
Right.
And then number 3 was the reason I was weighing all my food is I was on this quest for fatness. I was trying to disprove the calories in, calories out model.
Right.
So I was trying to consume 7 times my resting metabolic rate in 12 hours or something, and it was just way too much. I don't blame her. So to the question of whether all people who are involved with quantified self or just doing self-tracking will appear to the outside world as people with tinfoil hats on. I think there will always be plenty of those people.
Sure.
But I think that we will very soon get to a point where, well, we're already at a point where self-tracking is opt-out, whether it's geolocation or otherwise. And I think certainly as the technology progresses, once continuous monitoring through whether it's implants, patches, or something else, become the norm, people will stop even thinking about it as self-tracking. It will just be what you do.
What's the weirdest thing you've tracked about yourself?
Weirdest thing I've tracked? That's a good question. I know what it is. During that quest for fatness, and I actually outdid myself with that recently. I consumed 15,000 calories in 20 minutes.
Wow.
And then had close to 30 meals the next day, and clocked in with lower body fat the next day. But that's for the 4-hour chef, which is the next one. But the weirdest thing I tracked to try to identify calories in versus calories out, I had to look at excretion. So I actually measured my poo for a while in grams, and did before and after.
The question that I'm certain is on the mind of our audience is, how do you do that?
So for those of you who want to try this at home, it's not very fancy. First of all, caveat, you do not poo on the scale. Don't do that. Right? You need a container of some type. And then it's pretty self-explanatory. I recommend grams. I'll leave it at that.
All right, good.
I don't want
moving on, yes.
I do this so you don't have to.
Perhaps related to that is, something you talk about in your book is and we've talked about, is the question of, and you alluded to this earlier, whether the amount of information that's now possible to track about yourself brings wisdom, brings knowledge, or is just paralyzing, is sort of TMI,
Yeah.
What have you found, have you been able to detect any sweet spots in how to deliver information to yourself that allows you to use it and not be sort of just awestruck or annoyed by the amount of it?
Yeah, I think the cornerstone concept that at least I strive to embrace, and I think would be very valuable for companies to embrace also, is the idea of the minimal effective dose. What is the least that we can get someone to do that will lead to the downstream behaviors that we want? So how do we Trojan horse in, let's say, selling them what they want and then giving them what they need, or if someone has to lose, let's say, 150 pounds, starting them off with 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking up, not attempting to change their meals, not asking them to exercise. Trying to give people too many choices and too many actions, I think, is why most self-tracking fails. So really striving for minimalism results in less is more, I think.
What are the types of things that you think we're going to see people tracking in the next couple of years? I mean, as you pointed out, some of the stuff is becoming very mainstream now. We've seen a lot of stuff. I mean, the amount of people I've seen with Fitbits here at this conference is huge. That stuff is becoming normal. What are the couple things that you think you might, from the people you've seen, where acceptance is moving, where the tool sets are moving, that'll be the next few frontiers?
I think, given the prevalence of type 2 diabetes and whatnot, certainly cardiovascular disease, I think that we'll see, you already have home testing kits for things like hemoglobin A1c. It's basically a 3-month running average of fasting glucose. It's not quite that simple, but basically, I think people will, whether it's using, let's say, light lasers, much like a pulse oximeter, or some type of non-invasive sampling, blood glucose, I think, or interstitial glucose will come to be very common very, very quickly, as soon as we get past the pinpricks.
Yeah.
And beyond that,
you talked about the difficulty of measuring some things that like mood, cognitive function, stuff like that. These are very interesting people, but how do you measure things like that? Is that stuff trackable? Have you found any way to measure it yourself?
I think if you have something that is largely subjective, like mood, before I ever track something and determine how to track it, I want to ask myself, how will I act on the data? Yeah. And if not, I don't even go forward. But I'm very objective driven that way. I think that with mental performance, there's going to be a lot. I think that that's dependent on the development of the software. So for instance, I'm actually funding a study right now at UCSF, which is looking at using devices like the Kinect and the iPad for improving cognitive function, and whether that's working memory or other facets of executive.
How do you do that? Like what
Yeah, so looking at how the amount of information that you're given determines reaction speed, and then how you can improve that over time, how you can look at, there are actually separate studies being done within the same lab. Adam Ghazali is heading this up. There's going to be some fascinating stuff coming. I think once people see the promise and they can see the before and afters, right, and even the mitigation of things like dementia by using now readily available tools like touchscreen iPads, that's when software developers will be financially incentivized to create the right tracking tools. Yeah. I mean, currently we have things like dual end-back training, you have things like Lumosity and so forth that can give you certain data sets. But I'm very optimistic about the cognitive function, partially because mind and body are sort of one and the same to me.
Right.
I mean, it's just another organ. Right?
Sure.
But as far as things that are very difficult that I wish more people would track, I think fertility metrics would be way, way up there. So like sperm motility count, et cetera, I think is something that people should really, really measure as an insurance policy, but I'm not here to be the insurance police. If there were a company that could make that easier, I think there'd be a huge market for it.
Yeah, I'll bet. I think we can move on to the questions and answers now. We're at the 20-minute mark. Have we got the microphones back there? Excellent. Anyone got questions for Tim? Throw it out.
Hi, Tim. I love the 4-Hour Body. I think you've been asked this before, but have you thought about doing an app, an exercise app, which details stuff, and is there anything in the pipeline? Because I look stupid in the gym with your great big book nesting next to you.
You could do lat raises with 2 copies of the book. It's a heavy one. So I do currently have sort of a test drive app on Android, soon on iPhone, related to the 4-Hour Body for tracking purposes. I think that the 4-Hour Body, when it's viewed as sort of a choose your own adventure book, can be very useful. So a little bit, certainly if you're looking at it as a 600-page book, it can be really overwhelming. So I do have something in the pipeline, and it's actually in collaboration with the Lyft guys. So Lyft was incubated within Obvious Corporation, so the Ev and Biz and those guys from Twitter. And it's very simple. You establish a habit, and then you just click, yes, I have checked in, I have accomplished this habit, and then there are a number of interactive dynamics. So I'll be doing a 4-week challenge of sorts related to the 4-Hour Body, and I think that it will be a very good test, and I hope illustration of how very little prescriptive information can catalyze some pretty awesome change. There may be some other facets that I can't talk about just yet that'll make it particularly interesting, but I'm hoping that'll be a pretty huge data set. We'll see.
We have an online question. How long till trackers are internal? Will you be the first to sign up?
Well, I mean, given that I've had stuff plugged inside of me already, I could be one of the first to sign up. It depends on how well I understand the risks. I mean, I've done everything from flying in stem cell growth factors from Israel and injecting them up and down my spine with platelet-rich plasma. So as long as I feel I understand the science well enough, then I would be happy. Be happy to do it. I think we're talking about, right now, and certainly within the next 12 months, there'll be a lot of that.
Huh. Okay. We have a couple more questions. One back there.
Thank you. I'm curious if in all your attempts to track your responses to exercise and training regimens and diets, did you evaluate any breath gas analysis, your changes in oxygen, CO2, CO, H2S, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the challenges has been for me perambulatory test measures and what I can travel with, which is part of the reason insulin is so squirrely. I have done some gas exchange work looking at VO2 max. Did that both at Stanford, where way back in the day, I think it was 2005, I was actually a test subject for the glove, which is a cooling glove, which has some interesting military and sports applications. It's really fun. You get dressed up in full gear, military gear, with a weighted backpack and march to heat exhaustion in a sauna. I don't recommend it. So I did VO2 max testing for that. I also did some gas exchange testing at the Sports Science Institute of South Africa, which is one of the most impressive facilities I have ever seen in my life. That's where I also did muscle biopsy testing, so I had my legs cut open and bits of muscle tissue removed. I'd like to do more of it, is the answer. It's just something that I need to travel to a dedicated facility for, so I have less of an opportunity.
I want to correct that. This person, you can carry a suite of breath analyzers in your pocket.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'd love to carry some stuff around then. I'd be up for that.
All right, we got one more question from. Do we have another one here? All right. Tom. All right.
One of the interesting things to me is how. So your books have done really well. They've been bestsellers, but you also have this movement of people who are incredibly passionate about the stuff that you have codified. I mean, at Wired, we have now about 10 people following your 4-hour body kind of diet for various reasons. I'm curious what you've learned in, that's not the usual, even among kind of people who've had bestsellers, that they don't usually start movements.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what you've learned in terms of having this community of people behind you and kind of championing, or you being their champion.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that I've learned a few things. I do think there is a framework for behavioral change. I've looked a lot at what BJ Fogg has done and elsewhere, but you can give someone a prescription, and if they don't take the pill, the prescription doesn't matter. So how do you get people to take the pill is the puzzle that I've really tried to crack. And I think there are a number of ways that you look at it. First of all, you address the most common objections and identify the sticking points that they will hit. For instance, I tell people you will probably plateau between 6 and 8 weeks on this low-carb diet. You take a week off of PAG, you back off, you do this, and that's how you get back onto an upward trend on the graph. And I tell them what to expect, and I address the issues that they bring up preemptively. So I think that in addition to that, encouraging people to self-track and share the results, it has a self-perpetuating nature to it. I think those are a few of the reasons that it's been not only read but adopted by so many people. And
well, that speaks to the normalizing we were talking about earlier, about the sort of serial killer phenomena.
Yeah.
As more people do it, and to a certain extent, your book has given them permission to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say that just to talk about you have to get someone's attention before you can give them certainly a prescription or get them to take action. So I have this sort of reputation for being very hyperbolic and P.T. Barnum-like, and it's absolutely by design. That's how I get people in the gate, and that's how I get the attention so that I can give them the Trojan horse that then helps all of their blood markers. But I don't sell blood markers. I don't sell cholesterol. I don't sell fasting glucose. I sell six-pack abs. I sell 15-minute orgasms and all this stuff. And then people say, guess what? I used to be on insulin and now I'm not, or whatever it is. But that was the goal all along, but I have to sell them something else. And I think that it's very easy to take sort of a highbrow academic approach to this, where if your goal is to impact the highest number of people possible, it's very important to understand how to message properly. And it's also fun.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim, for taking the time to come here and talk. If you are interested in reading more about it, The 4-Hour Body is on the bookshelves now, and another book coming out, right?
Yeah, 4-Hour Chef next month on accelerated learning and everything related to skill acquisition.
Terrific. Thanks a lot.